Arkansas stole its first buggy in 1892. I met your grandma pig slopping in 46.
Oh, every Christmas we'd visit my Uncle Fred in prison.
And welcome, America, to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. Fisher at this end, your radio root sleuth on the program where we shake your family tree and watch the nuts fall out. Well, it is great to have you, Genies. I know you're going to enjoy hearing our guest today. Maureen Taylor, the photo detective, is on for the first time in 2022. She's going to be talking about those pesky 1970s era photo albums that drive us all nuts, and a scam she recently discovered that may have impacted your ancestors and their family photo collection. Plus, Paul Woodbury is going to be back talking about the Centimorgan estimator tool on DNA Painter. A little advanced, but still good stuff for the average genetic genealogist. Hey, don't forget to sign up for our courses on DNA research, how to use matches to make breakthroughs on your family history, and also basic genealogy, just the fundamentals. You can find it all at ExtremeGenes.com. And don't forget to sign up for our weekly Genie newsletter at ExtremeGenes.com and on our Facebook page. It's free. You get a blog from me each week and links to past and present shows and great stories you'll be interested in as a genealogist. Right now, out to Boston, Massachusetts, where my good friend, the chief genealogist of the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org, is standing by. David Allen Lambert, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. I'm finding all sorts of fun things in DNA matches. You know, it's funny, as a kid, my mother always told me never to play with matches, but now I do it all the time.
That's true.
Well, I've been involved with the local historical society here in Stoughton, Massachusetts since I was 11. And I'm always finding this, that, or the other thing that's intriguing, but I found a published account of every resident who owned property back in 1871. So it's like a census substitute, but it's not just the person's name. It's their name, the value of their house, the value of their barn, the value of their wagon, the amount of money they had, the amount of cows they had, and more importantly, how many pigs there were.
Of course.
So on James Drake's farm here in Stoughton, where I live, 26 years before my house was built on his farm, there were at least 2 cows, 2 pigs, 53 acres of land, and 10 acres of woodlot. Question is my part of the property where the cows lived or where the trees stood? More research on that later.
Wow, that's a great find, though. Now, this was what record?
It's essentially a tax valuation of 1871 in my hometown. How about you? What have you been digging up these days?
Well, you know, I got that big haul last week of photographs and albums, and I found this cute little picture of my uncle with his childhood buddy. And what's fun is I have this story my uncle wrote about this kid and what happened back in 1920. I'm going to share it with you. These are his own words. He said, the first little story I can remember was in North Albany, Oregon, where I was born in 1916. This probably happened in 1920. We lived by a lake. In fact, the property line was in the lake. And my mother, Clara, raised little ducks. And when they got older, we ate them. Well, there were turtles in the lake that ate the little baby ducks if you let them in there too soon. So she had a pen and she kept the little baby ducks in the pen till they got big enough that the turtles wouldn't eat them. Well, one Sunday morning, my parents decided they were going to have duck dinner for the evening meal. A little neighbor boy named Lloyd Cade, the same age as I was, watched my dad as he went out and grabbed this big duck, and to our horror, he grabbed it around the neck and he gave it 3 or 4 big swings and snapped its head off. A horrible sight. Then he had a pan of boiling water, and I went down with him by the lakeside while he plucked all the feathers off the duck. Well, I thought my neighbor friend went home, but Lloyd on his way home passed the duck pen with the little baby ducks in them. And when my dad and I headed for the house after finishing plucking the duck, here's good old Lloyd Cade with blood all over his little white play suit and about 12 little ducks in the pen with separate heads.
Oh, no.
He had wrung every little baby duck's head off. Well, my dad grabbed him and gave him a couple of whacks on the butt, and he went screaming home. Well, he must have told his daddy that my dad beat him, and that was his blood. Well, here comes Mr. Cade over with fire in his eyes, and my dad stopped him and took him out and showed him what he had done. So poor little Lloyd Cade got another spanking.
Well, that's a great story. It's kind of not fitting for dinner time story, but hey, if you like duck, why not?
Well, and I've got a picture now of the two of them together, which I never imagined. So that's great to throw in with the history, you know?
Not with the dead ducks, I hope. You know, one of the things that I always find is probably the oldest thing we have for ourselves are what? Our documents. Maybe you have your birth certificate. I have mine. But you know that those are really an old form of identification that go well back into the 19th century. Of course, towns recorded these records. But you know why a lot of times they're recorded in the 19th century?
Why?
Because of child labor laws protected the children.
And so that's why they were issued. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, you know, those were among the big changes in the 19th century. They wanted to stop the exploitation of children.
Well, you know, it's funny. My father was born in the 1920s, and because my grandfather, the elusive bootlegger, was the one who reported my father's birth, but must have been having an interesting evening because he couldn't remember if my dad was born in the evening of October 25th or on the morning of October 26th, 1925.
Interesting.
So Dad had two birth dates.
Did he celebrate them both?
We did alternate them occasionally, yes.
Interesting.
I asked him one time when I was about 12, I said, Dad, does that make you twice as old because you've been celebrating two birthdays your whole life? And he gave me a look of death, and I never asked him that again.
Good call.
You know those board games that we had when we were kids that we really didn't like because couldn't figure out the instructions? You know, those complicated ones that are still sitting in the boxes in our cellar? Yeah, well, they found one thousands of years old in the country of Oman. And the fun thing about that is they really don't know how to play it because, well, there's no instruction sheet. I guess the moral of this story is if you're going to bury something in the ground for 1,000 years, put a clay tablet with the instruction sheet under it neatly for the archaeologist to find.
Very nice.
Well, that's all I have for this week from Beantown and Abroad. I just wanted to tell you, if you're not a member of American Ancestors, you can save $20 by using the coupon code EXTREME on AmericanAncestors.org. Talk to you in just a couple of moments.
All right, yes, for Ask Us Anything. And coming up next, we're going to talk to the photo detective, Maureen Taylor, for the first time in 2022 about those pesky 1970s photo albums when we return in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes. Genies, our sponsors at Ancestry.com have started 2022 by giving the super site a complete makeover. If you haven't visited Ancestry.com in a while, this would be a great time to check it out. It's a whole new look, and personally, I love it. Ancestry's baby company, Newspapers.com, has also added millions of new records to their obituary and marriage index. Initially, the index only covered the U.S. and Canada, but now it includes the U.K. and Australia. Some go as far back as the early 1800s, while most cover the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Ancestry is also offering this year, on Tuesdays, 15-minute Facebook Live education snippets with our friend Krista Cowan. And if you're interested in getting your kids and grandkids more involved in learning about their family history, Ancestry is working on more and more ways to bring them in. So stay tuned. We talk to Krista each month as we follow what's happening at Ancestry.com.
Unknown parentage, lineage society membership, building your family tree, leaving a legacy. Regardless of your reasons for hiring a professional researcher, Legacy Tree Genealogists can help you discover your family's past. Their genealogists are highly rated in their field with specialties in DNA analysis, historical context, and forensic genealogy. For nearly 20 years, Legacy Tree Genealogists have created thousands of professionally bound and digital reports for families like yours around the world. So whether you've hit a brick wall in your research or are just getting started, Legacy Tree Genealogists can help you tell your story and preserve it for generations to come. To receive a free estimate for professional research, visit legacytree.com or call 1-800-818-1476. That's 1-800-818-1476. We'd be happy to talk to you. Legacy Tree Genealogists.
Hey Genies, it's Fisher here, and my shiny new ExtremeGenes.com website has been described as having that new car smell. I love hearing that. Having been with you for over 8 years now, it felt like time to help out listeners and followers who need to know the basics of genealogical research, as well as how to understand your DNA test results, and to be able to put them to work for you, breaking down brick walls, identifying birth parents, locating new cousins who may have photos and information that can't be found anywhere else, and verifying your paper trails. Yes, DNA can do all that, and I can show you how. Check out the all-new ExtremeGenes.com website and download the free Genealogy Strategy Roadmap and the free DNA Starter Guide. Then, if you like what you see, you can take those next steps to sign up for the video courses that you can watch at your leisure. I'll take you through all the basics, step by step. Find out more now at ExtremeGenes.com. All right, it's a new year, and that means lots of new opportunities to extend your family history collection, gather those stories, and of course, right at the heart of all this stuff is our good friend, the photo detective, Maureen Taylor. Hey, Maureen, welcome back. Happy New Year.
Hey, Scott. Happy New Year to you.
You know, I just got this huge batch of photographs the other day. In one day, I received 2 packages from one cousin on my dad's side, one cousin on my mother's side, and the mother's side one was loaded with a photo album from the 1970s that had belonged to my uncle. And I'll tell you what, I hate those 1970s sticky photo albums with a passion.
Oh, those toxic albums really are toxic.
Yeah, they really are. And he has pictures back from the 19-teens and 1920s in there. And I had this great little picture of another uncle as a little boy with the older uncle and another little play pal. And I went to take this out of that album, and it took the side of the head of my little uncle out of it. And I had to go back in and go, wait a minute, what's this hole from? Where did this come from? And I had to go back in and carefully remove it and place it back in from behind and tape it on and then scan it and then Photoshop it to eliminate the tears, which is fine now. But, I mean, this stuff is a nightmare.
Okay, so those albums are poor quality plastic, poor quality paper, and glue.
Yes.
And what you described is exactly what I warn people about. I'm like, you have to do 3 things with these albums, and these are the only albums you need to take apart.
Okay.
These are the toxic 1970s ones with the glue strips on the pages. You photograph each page so that you have the arrangement.
Scan.
You scan them,
Mm-hmm.
photograph them or scan them, whatever you want to do.
Yep.
And then you remove them from the album, and you do so very carefully so you don't behead someone like what happened to you. And you can use dental floss for that. Buy unwaxed dental floss. But also, that stuff is sharp. If you've ever cut your gum with it, you know that. So you have to be careful because you could behead somebody the other way.
That way, too.
And then and third thing you need to do is get a good quality photo album from Gaylord.com sells them, for instance, and they're having a fabulous sale until the beginning of March.
So what do? They have little pockets in them? They're acid free, I would assume.
Yeah, they're all acid free and polyester overlays, and you should check out what they have on their website. They are the leading archival supplier. And if you use PD25, you get 25% off your purchase. And I don't have any kind of affiliate relationship with them. This is just what they decided to do because we were doing a promotion at the beginning of the year called Digitize Your Life.
Yeah, well, this is really important that I digitize this stuff because,
exactly.
The digitized stuff now is going to start surviving longer than the old photos, I think, in many cases. Because, how many times do you hear about somebody saying, okay, somebody died and I went over to the house to help clean up and I found this photo album in the trash bin. And, it almost seems inevitable that if one generation doesn't get rid of it, the next one will, which is why it's so important to scan.
Exactly. So my relationship with those 1970s albums is I have some of my own that I haven't taken apart yet, but they have like memories in them, right? From ticket stubs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
My mom decided that she would sort the family photographs in the 70s and make an album just for my baby pictures and stuff like that, and one for my sister, one for my brother. And so my sister had a significant birthday a couple of years ago, and I have to admit, I hadn't touched them yet because I thought, oh, what are they going to be like? And I took my sister's album out of the box, and Scott, I lifted up the album and all the pictures just rained out of it.
Oh.
So the glue released. So I didn't have to do what I thought I needed to do to it.
Right.
Of course, I lost the order of them, but
That's still better than having to try to scrape them all out with dental floss.
yeah, but they were mostly prints that had that resin coating on them, so they didn't stick as much as what you're talking about. You're talking about a 1920s picture. Though that's a very soft paper.
Right.
That's going to really, really stick to that glue.
Yeah.
Oof.
That's the problem.
And did you really say you taped the head back on the body?
Not on the front, dear, on the back. It had to be secured there somehow. So, I had to fit it in the hole from behind. And yes, I did that.
Oh, I think I'm going to put my fingers in my ear and go, la, la, la. I didn't hear Scott say that.
Well, it had to be secured somehow because it was completely detached. We decapitated my poor little uncle from 1917. So that's really good. You were telling me the other day that you ran into something recently called a crayon scam, and I'm fascinated to hear about this.
Yes, I've been doing some research on something that popped up when I was doing research on something else. You know how that goes.
Yes.
And
rabbit hole.
I am completely in the rabbit hole. So the late 19th century, early 20th century, there were these mostly young men who went door to door, knocking on the door, and they say, "Oh, Mrs. Smith, wouldn't you like to have a beautiful crayon portrait, oversized crayon portrait of your loved one or your ancestor, and it will be such and such an amount of money. Give me the money, give me the photo." Well, the whole thing was a scam. They called it in the newspaper, crayon swindlers.
You know what this reminds me of is Paper Moon, where Ryan O'Neal was driving around with Tatum O'Neal and he was pretending to sell Bibles that their loved one had died and had ordered it with their name engraved on it. Remember all that? I mean, that was the era for this kind of thing.
I desperately want to find out if some of these police departments still have the old evidence, because I'd like to actually see if they still have the photographs from these individuals. But there was like a suspicious landlady in like New York City, and she turned in her tenants and the police came because this was a big deal. This was like front page story, like all over the country.
Really?
Yeah. Different companies were popping up all over the place. And she turned them in and the cops came and they found thousands of photographs in their apartment.
Wow.
They were busy.
Yeah. I have a pastel portrait of my second great grandfather. It's pretty large. It's 3 feet tall and 2 feet wide. It was beautifully done. And I have the photograph that it was done from. But this was back in the later part of the 19th century. And I'm wondering if that's what they were talking about. Pastels or actual crayons like Crayola?
Exactly. That's what they're talking about. So a crayon portrait is an actual photograph that's been enhanced with charcoal or crayon or oil paints, something like that.
Okay. And so they were going to take this and then get back to them, and then they disappear with the money and the picture.
Right. So the person answering the door would give them whatever the sum of money was they needed.
Yeah.
They said they needed to do this, and they would take the photograph and they would actually, in some cases, give the client a receipt and then never come back.
Wow.
There were so many of them. It's really a big research rabbit hole, because I thought, maybe I'll just do the one in New York. And then I found one in Topeka, and I found one in Worcester, Massachusetts, and one in Trenton, New Jersey. And then I just started finding more and more and more. And I thought, oh, my goodness.
Isn't it interesting when some scam comes along, it gets popular everywhere, and it doesn't matter the era. It doesn't matter. And I ran across some crib notes that my great aunt had left about the family, and she talked about Lord Townsley being in the family. And then when the internet came along, I looked up Lord Townsley and found out it was a big scam in the 19th century, where people said that this guy back in England, his daughter had married an American. He didn't approve. He told them he was disowning them, and then had a change of heart and put them back in the will, but they didn't know it. They were back in the United States. And so anybody descended from this Lord Townsley was going to wind up with this big piece of the pie, because now it had been growing for over a century and a half, and it was a fortune, and you can go back to England and walk on the farm where he lived. I mean, it was insane. And it's like, my great aunt must have really believed this from back in the day. They must have been approached on it. But it even makes a reference at some point that Aunt so-and-so walked on the farm over there. It's on the Lord Townsley side of the family. I'm going, no, there's no Lord
Exactly.
Townsley.
And these swindlers must have looked quite trustworthy.
Oh,
Otherwise,
yeah.
Why would you hand over your precious family photograph and some cash?
Right. Wow. That's incredible. Good stuff. So I understand you are part of this female posse here that's putting together an amazing thing right now for Valentine's Day. And I think we got to let everybody know about it because it's a real valuable prize you're all putting together. Some of my favorite people in the world, you and Lisa Louise and Jessica Taylor and Janet Havorka and who am I missing? Diane Southard.
Diane Southard.
Yep.
Amy Johnson Crow.
Amy Johnson Crow. Yeah, I mean, six of
us.
Six Hall of Famers right there. And you're doing this Valentine's Day giveaway. Tell us about this.
Right. So we've all donated something into the prize package. It's this huge genealogy giveaway for Valentine's Day. You can go to www.yourdnaguide.com/Valentine to register. Lisa Louise Cook is giving away a premium membership. Amy Johnson Crow is a consult on U.S. genealogy. Legacy Tree, Jessica Taylor, is another consult. I'm giving away a 6-photo consult. Janet Havorka is giving away a family chart.
Yeah.
And Diane Southard is donating a registration to one of her DNA classes.
Wow.
I think that's everyone.
Yeah, that's a lot. And Diane's hosting this, so you go to yourdnaguide.com/Valentine to register for it. But that sounds like a heck of a value.
And then on Valentine's Day, we're going to go live.
Okay.
And do the drawing.
Wow, that's going to be fun. Well, thanks for the tips, Maureen. I wish I'd talked to you before I started working on this photo album thing from the 70s.
Yeah, you know who you can call.
I know. I have your number. You're very convenient. So, of course, you can always reach out to Maureen Taylor at maureentaylor.com. And thanks so much, Maureen. Happy New Year to you. And hopefully we're all going to make a whole bunch of awesome finds this year.
That's what I'm hoping for.
Yep, absolutely. I'm off to a good start, except for this little setback. Take care. Right. We'll talk to you again down the line. And coming up next, Paul Woodbury from our sponsors at Legacy Tree Genealogist talking about the Centimorgan Estimator tool over at DNA Painter when we return in 5 minutes. Welcome back to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth, and it's great to have Paul Woodbury back on, my good friend from Legacy Tree Genealogist, one of our great sponsors. And Paul is going to take us down a little road involving DNA research today that might be a little deeper in the weeds than we've been used to in the past, talking about the Centimorgan Estimator tool now over at DNA Painter. And Paul, I guess just from the beginning, for people who aren't familiar with this kind of research, let's talk about the very basic. What is a centimorgan?
All right. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So centimorgans, we use them commonly in our genetic genealogy research. We often will point to the number of centimorgans that we share with a match as we're evaluating how significant they might be. We use the amount of DNA, and we kind of refer to it as an amount of DNA in terms of centimorgans that we share with somebody to evaluate how closely related they might be. And I think we often refer to this measurement, but a lot of us don't quite have a firm grasp of what it actually is. In all actuality, a centimorgan is a measure of the probability of recombination over one generation. So if you look at it, 100 centimorgans, a segment of DNA that is 100 centimorgans, what that means is, on average, there will be one recombination or one crossover event between those two locations in one generation. And that's important because the way that our DNA is organized, different parts of our DNA are more likely to recombine than others. So we have some ballpark estimates of determining how many centimorgans corresponds to a certain number of base pairs, but those estimates really aren't exact because you could have 10 million base pairs of DNA at the very beginning of a chromosome that could be 20 centimorgans, whereas you could have 10 million base pairs in the middle of a chromosome that is only 1 centimorgan. And so really the centimorgan value depends on the likelihood of recombination, where that DNA is located across the chromosome, and the likelihood of recombination in that area.
So let's talk about DNA Painter. I mean, Johnny Pearl came up with this several years ago, and since then it has become really an invaluable tool for genetic genealogy. And I'm a little confused about what a centimorgan estimator tool is and why it's important.
Yeah, so what Johnny has done is created this tool in collaboration with some others to help us plug in any chromosome number, the start location and the end location, and it will generate an estimate for the centimorgan value for that segment of DNA. I mean, that's fun to know, but really, how is that useful to us in genetic genealogy, right? I've thought of just a few applications where I've had an opportunity to apply this, and it's really been helpful in some cases for some genetic genealogy research. The first is, imagine that you have a test that you've taken at 23andMe. At 23andMe, with our test results, we get an ethnicity chromosome painting that shows the chunks of DNA that have been assigned to different populations. And not only do we get that painting, but we also have the opportunity to download that raw ethnicity data, so we can actually get the chromosomes, start locations, and the stop locations for each of those chunks of DNA that come from different regions of our ancestry. So now imagine that in your ethnicity painting, you have this tiny little sliver of, let's say, Native American admixture. If you download the ethnicity raw data and take that chunk of DNA, the chromosome number, the start location, and the end location of that chunk of Native American admixture, you can then go and plug that in to DNA Painter's centimorgan estimator tool to determine how significant is that segment. Is it 1 centimorgan? Is it 3 centimorgans? Is it 20 centimorgans, right? As a general rule, we often point to segments being significant or not at a threshold of about 7 to 10 centimorgans. So if it's smaller than 7 centimorgans, it might not be as reliable as we might hope. It might not be a true segment. It might be background noise. It might be a misattribution of the ethnicity admixture, so it might just be kind of a blip. But if it's larger than that, it gives us a lot more confidence to say, yeah, I do have an ancestor who contributed Native or African or Eastern European or Jewish or whatever ethnicity you might be analyzing. I have an ancestor that contributed that DNA to me, and we're fairly confident that this is a true segment.
Right. And if you have that background story that you've been told for generations about it, this can help confirm that.
It can help. It can start you down the path to then go and see, okay, did I inherit this chunk of DNA from that particular line that I think it came from, right? So it opens up some doors and windows for possibilities for research avenues.
So that's a great application. What else?
So another application is when you might be looking at the DNA that you share with known relatives. Let's say that I have 2 genetic cousins, and I know that they are both related to me through a common ancestor. They are both related to me, let's say, through my 3rd great-grandfather. I know that we are all related through that individual, and we're related through different descendants of that 3rd great-grandfather. And let's say they share DNA with me on a triangulated segment, but it's kind of partially overlapping. So let's say that one match shares with me on chromosome 2 between 100 million and 150 million base pairs, those locations. And then the second one shares with me between 125 million and 175 million. So they're kind of overlapping, but they're not sharing in the exact same location, but we have one that starts earlier and ends, kind of in the middle of where the other one starts sharing, and then the other one shares a little bit further along. So we've kind of got this composite segment that I inherited from our common ancestor, but I only share parts of it with my relatives who are related through that same ancestral line. We can kind of estimate approximately the centimorgan value for that composite segment that I inherited from my great-great-great-grandfather, but the centimorgan estimator tool gives me a really valuable application to be able to take the start point for my first match and the end point for my second match and really combine those segments together to get a new estimate for what is the centimorgan value for this entire segment that I inherited from my third great-grandfather.
Wow.
So it can kind of help us take that next step and then combine those segments together as we're mapping those relationships.
So this is kind of an idea for people who are just getting into genetic genealogy. Don't let all this frighten you. This is a little more advanced, wouldn't you say, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely something that you're going to be doing a little bit further down the road in your research process. Usually I only get to chromosome mapping a little bit further into the research process, but they can be helpful for particular situations where we might be exploring these questions in relation to a research problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So where do you see this all going now? I mean, DNA Painter has evolved a lot since it first came to our attention, about 4 or 5 years ago now. What else do you think is coming down the line with them?
You know, I don't know, but I am excited. I really have loved the tools that they have released to us. They've got some great tools to help and assist in learning more about your genetic genealogy and really taking DNA evidence and really crafting it in a way that you can interpret it, understand it, and help achieve and come to genealogical conclusions.
Well, I know there are a lot of heads that have exploded over your explanation here, Paul. Mine has. I'm going to try to put the pieces back together. But it's nice to know it's there, and it's nice to know that it can be useful for us as we deal with some of the more challenging matches that we've come across and helping us to prove our ancestry and to break through some of those brick walls. Thanks so much for coming on, Paul. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And coming up next, it is the return of David Allen Lambert, the chief genealogist of the New England Historic Genealogical Society at AmericanAncestors.org, for another round of Ask Us Anything, answering your questions when we return in 3 minutes.
Unknown parentage, lineage society membership, building your family tree, leaving a legacy. Regardless of your reasons for hiring a professional researcher, Legacy Tree Genealogists can help you discover your family's past. Their genealogists are highly rated in their field with specialties in DNA analysis, historical context, and forensic genealogy. For nearly 20 years, Legacy Tree Genealogists have created thousands of professionally bound and digital reports for families like yours around the world. So whether you've hit a brick wall in your research or are just getting started, Legacy Tree Genealogists can help you tell your story and preserve it for generations to come. To receive a free estimate for professional research, visit legacytree.com or call 1-800-818-1476. That's 1-800-818-1476. We'd be happy to talk to you. Legacy Tree Genealogists.
Hey Genies, as we've dug into our family history explorations over the past year, our community at Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies has taken off. This is where you can meet like-minded genealogists who can help you break through those brick walls and find a whole city behind it, occupied by ancestors whose names you don't even know yet. This is where you can learn from your fellow genies and ask questions, because many in our community have already been into some of the records you're looking for. Genealogy and Breakthrough Strategies is free. What a great place for brainstorming and getting to know other people who totally get your passion for family history research. If you're looking to take the next step in sharpening your skills, here's a great chance to learn from others and give back in areas you've already become expert in. So join us. That page again is Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. It's a long name, but we cover a lot of territory. Genealogy and Family History Breakthrough Strategies. Genies, our sponsors at Ancestry.com have started 2022 by giving the super site a complete makeover. If you haven't visited Ancestry.com in a while, this would be a great time to check it out. It's a whole new look, and personally, I love it. Ancestry's baby company, newspapers.com, has also added millions of new records to their obituary and marriage index. Initially, the index only covered the U.S. and Canada, but now it includes the U.K. and Australia. Some go as far back as the early 1800s, while most cover the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Ancestry is also offering this year, on Tuesdays, 15-minute Facebook Live education snippets with our friend Krista Cowan. And if you're interested in getting your kids and grandkids more involved in learning about their family history, Ancestry is working on more and more ways to bring them in. So stay tuned. We talk to Krista each month as we follow what's happening at Ancestry.com. All right, we are back for Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and ExtremeGenes.com. Fisher here. David Allen Lambert is back. And David, our first question this week comes from Cheyenne, Wyoming. Jeanette asks, Fish and Dave, what do I say is my ethnicity when I was born in a foreign country to American parents whose parents came from Poland and Italy? Interesting.
Ooh, that's like one of those genealogical questions is if a train leaves Chicago in 1874 and doesn't go to Canada until 1875, did it really leave in 1875? Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. And I suppose it's how you interpret it. I mean, first off, it's a little gray on this question. We really are not sure if Jeanette was actually born in, say, military property of the United States government, say like military brat, born on a base in Germany, for instance. So technically you are on American soil, more or less, even though you are born in a foreign country. Mm-hmm. It's almost like if you were born in the consulate in London, an American consulate, the embassy, would you consider it American soil? Well, legally it is.
Yeah, sure.
But technically, your birth record won't say American consulate. It'll probably say that you were born in the UK. The real thing is, what level is your nationality? And I think that she brought up a good point about her parents being of Polish and Italian background. What level do you stop at? For me, I'm American. I have dual citizenship with Canada, so I'm an American and Canadian. My mother and father were born in two different countries. My mother's Canada. My father is American. My grandparents are all born in 4 different countries. So if I tell somebody I'm American, somebody else I might tell them I'm American Canadian. Another one I might say I'm French, English, Canadian, and American. Mm-hmm. That's a quarter. But I mean, as we now have with our DNA, the ever-changing, I am now 41% Scottish, thank you, Ancestry.com. But I can't find that kilt in my family tree. So it really is a sliding scale. I mean, what do you tell people when people ask you what your nationality is?
It really depends on who the audience is, right? Who's asking? Mm-hmm. Is it a genealogist asking me? Well, then I'll start going through, well, my mother's side was entirely Scandinavian. Her father's side was half Norwegian and Swedish. Her mother was Swedish. And on my dad's side, it's English and French and Dutch and some Deutschland back there. But if it's just somebody I run into while I'm on a vacation, what country are you from? Well, I'm an American. It's as simple as that.
TSA.
Exactly.
TSA, yes, I'm American. Yep.
That's all. Me. Yeah, that's all they need to know, right?
Well, I mean, like I say, it really is the audience, because I've had people who will tell me they're Italian. But I'm like, but your last name is Fitzpatrick.
Right.
Well, I'm a little Irish, too, on my dad's side. Well, I said, wouldn't that make you half Irish and half Italian? Well, actually, my grandmother's Italian, too, so that makes me 3/4. And then, I said, it doesn't work that way. You really have to look at the big picture. And, I mean, personally, if I look at my Y DNA, thousands of years ago, my ancestors lived in now what is Bosnia. So do I become a Bosnian, Anglo-Saxon, English, Irish, American, Canadian? I mean, really, that's only one spur of the tree.
Right. Well, I would say to Jeanette then, that I'm part Polish and part Italian to an American person, right? But if you're overseas, you say, well, I'm American. I have a little
Jeanette,
Polish
and Italian. How much time do you have anyways?
Right.
Always say that.
yeah, that's right. We are limited in how much we can discuss this. So very interesting question and an even more fascinating discussion there. So there you go.
Much.
Thank you so much for the question, Jeanette. And coming up next, we have a question from a listener who's got an ancestor who was supposedly a sailor, but had some papers that were supposed to prove his American citizenship. Speaking of which, why did he have to do that? That's the question. We'll find out more when we return with Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. All right, back at it for Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and extremegenes.com. Fish here, David over there. And David, this question is out of Tampa, Florida. Jelaine asks, guys, my ancestor was a sailor, and it's in his history that he carried papers to prove he was an American. Why was that necessary? Good question, Jelaine.
Ooh, that allows me to put on my military historian hat. Let's go back to the era of the Star-Spangled Banner and Francis Scott Key and the burning of Washington.
War of 1812.
I have an ancestor who was in that war, and he wasn't on a vessel, but if he was, he probably would need this. Essentially proof that you're an American. Of course, one of the things you may remember from history class, kids, is that one of the reasons we went to the war is because the British were boarding our vessels and taking American sailors and claiming they were British and enforcing them to be in the British Navy. So a seaman's protection paper, Fish, is that document basically a sworn legal statement, may it be from a family member or a judge, that states that the said person was born on American soil on this date. Sometimes you get the place. Now, these documents generally don't survive because it would be just like your high school diploma. It'd be folded up, put into your sea bag, and you had it in case you needed it. And sometimes, obviously, after your term being on a vessel, probably got rid of it. But the registers of such seaman protection papers survive. The National Archives, for one, has a large collection of them that you can search by particular ports where it's registered. My great-grandfather's older brother was on a whaling ship back in the 18-teens, and he was required to have it because it was right around that time of the War of 1812.
Yep.
And you might even have a story in your own family of some of our listeners who may have that seaman protection paper still in their possession. And they're great because it may give you a birthplace when there was no birth certificate. Think about it. In 1790, they were recording records, but not every place was there a birth certificate.
Sure.
They don't happen until another century from there.
These are great.
So,
my great-great-grandmother's brother was in the Navy around the time of the 1812 war also, and I found his record in the Seaman Protection Register. And he was born in New York, and I got a lot of good detail from that. Here's the best one, though, Dave, because this went on and on and on into the 20th century. My grandfather had a brother, and I had no idea that he worked as what they call a scullion, like cleaning up in the kitchen on a passenger ship. And his photograph was in there, and we had no pictures of him, none whatsoever. The only picture we ever found was when they started including these photographs in the seaman protection applications in the early 1900s. And then I found another cousin down another line. His picture was in there. We couldn't find anywhere else. So it kind of goes almost hand in hand, I would say, with the passport applications. There's a lot of material in there, especially in the 20th century, because they filled out the applications themselves. So you see signatures on there, photographs. It's really good stuff.
It is, and hopefully this encourages some of our listeners that have ancestors that went to sea around that time or a little later to find additional documents. It's always about finding the stories.
Yep, and we should mention those are on Ancestry.com, our sponsor, so you can find them right there. It's good stuff. So great question, Jelaine. Hope that helps you out, and thank you for it. And Dave, thanks so much. We'll talk to you again next week.
Until then.
All right, my friend. And of course, if you have a question for Ask Us Anything, we would love to hear from you. Just email us at askusanything@extremegenes.com. And that is our show for this week. Hope you enjoyed it. If you missed any of it or you want to catch it again, of course, listen to the podcast on iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Apple Media, and ExtremeGenes.com. Thanks for joining us. Talk to you again next week. And remember, as far as everyone knows, we're a nice, normal family.